Hi, and welcome to the recording of our UnConference. I hope you enjoy this invigorating discussion led by our Chief Medical and Scientific Officer, Dr. Michael Murphy.
Good morning, everyone. Mike Murphy. I'm Chief Medical and Scientific Officer for the company, also one of the founders of the company. My particular area of interest is program and experimental design. And to be honest, I've never actually knowingly participated in an UnConference before, but it looks exciting. We have a loose structure to it. We have some questions, but who knows where this conversation goes today. So let me introduce my co-host today, which is Laurie. Laurie, if you could.
Hi, everyone. I am the site activation head for worldwide clinical trials. And my career actually began working directly with patients. I was an ophthalmology study coordinator as one of my very first jobs and enjoyed the connection that we had with patients during that time. And then from there, I moved on to biotech, where I worked in ophthalmology as a CRA and a clinical manager. And even then, I was very closely involved in autoimmune diseases related to ophthalmology, such as Sjogren's syndrome. And I attended and worked very closely with patient advocacy groups there. And then finally, I have most recently, over the last 15 years, worked at two clinical research organizations as a project manager and in site management, where again, I've worked very closely with patients and patient advocacy groups, along with the regulatory and site activation and project management processes. So pleased to be here, and definitely we'll look forward to the discussion that we're about to have.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Laurie. With your background, I'm anxious to hear some of your experiences, both past and future. I'd like to introduce now our youngest member of the group, and certainly one of the nicest that I've had the pleasure to work with. Yalinda, would you say a few words, please?
Yes. Hi, I'm Yalinda. I'm 16 years old, and I have Emery-Dreifuss muscular dystrophy. I am part of the Kids Illinois chapter with Lurie's Children's Hospital, and I'm so excited to share my experience with all of you.
Thank you so much, Linda. Very much appreciate your coming on today. And I've enjoyed actually meeting with you already and speaking with you about some of these topics we have. And then next, why don't we introduce Leanne, if you could, please.
Hi, thank you. I'm Leanne West. I am the president of the International Children's Advisory Network. And if you haven't heard of us before, we are obviously an international organization, as the name suggests, but we have 27 chapters around the world on 4 different continents. We also started a virtual chapter so that any child can participate from anywhere. And kids are our members, so that's who we want. We want the kids to be involved, just like Yalinda is. Most of our kids range in age from 8 to 18. And most of them have some sort of clinical diagnosis, though we do have a handful of kids who do not. So truly, any child is welcome to participate. You can find us associated with lots of different children's hospitals. We are always looking for new chapters to start too. So if you have a children's hospital and you want to create a chapter there, please reach out to us, and you can get a hold of us through our website, which is iCanresearch.org. We can make that available after the conference too. That's it. Thank you.
Oh, very nice. Leanne, is Amy joining us today? I hadn't noticed she was online today, but
she is.
Yeah, Amy, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hey, I'm Amy Omer, and I'm the director of the International Children's Advisory Network. Leanne and I work closely together to help kids share their stories and share their voices, like Yalinda. And we hope to help impart some wisdom and show how kids can be involved to create a better medical system.
Very nice indeed. And then finally, of course, good colleague Anne. This will loom as an important topic today. Anne, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hi, good morning. I'm Anne Cropp. I'm Chief Scientific Officer of Early Access Care. And I first began with rare diseases at my time at the NIH 25 years ago, and also at that time began with my first expanded access program. And so today I really love this conversation because it's very patient focused, and that's how I began even before I went into the industry. And it was working with patients in mind and trying to do something very unique for patients at that time, and love the evolution that has happened over the years. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some of those thoughts.
Thank you so much, Anne. Anne has a remarkable history with promoting patient access to new medications. So questions as to when should we do this, how should we do it, what would be the best method are going to loom large in our discussion today. So how do we keep our studies moving ahead in a trial environment, in the COVID-19 environment? Are we successful? Are we having difficulties? It kind of begins, I think, with the question of feasibility. The feasibility of doing the study seems to be an important element in everything that we do. And I'm wondering if we just take a few minutes, kind of to describe, Laurie, well, what is it exactly? I mean, what exactly are you doing here on these programs?
Well, thank you, Dr. Murphy. Normally in feasibility, we're looking at finding the right countries and sites, and of course in rare disease, that's always a challenge because inherently, it's more difficult to find these patients across the globe. But in a COVID environment, it's not just determining where to find the patients and doing the normal process. Along with the normal process, we also have to take into consideration any timeline changes, any burdens that are going on with regulatory agencies because of COVID. We need to determine that before we even begin the study so that we have a full understanding of where we may encounter delays, where we won't encounter delays, and also contingencies for how to keep the trial moving even when there are delays. And we've been successful throughout this COVID environment in even moving our studies forward, especially if you're working closely with the regulatory agencies, IRBs, ECs. If you work closely with them and they know that something's coming and what to expect, we actually have been able to move things forward.
Laurie, hasn't it always been a problem though? Even pre-COVID, it seems to me we've always had this issue in terms of designing studies that were eminently doable. I like to say over my years of doing this, I've designed a few studies that would be very difficult for anyone to implement. So I'd like to say, as you look back on things, have you seen a difference in how we're doing the feasibility assessments?
Yes, I think with the feasibility assessments, we are, I think where it starts is really, first of all, incorporating the model that you need early on in the protocol development process. So what you need to understand the patients. Before it used to be more of an afterthought, and patient advocacy groups or even the patient profile themselves and what their needs were more ancillary to the protocol design. Now, I think it's much more prevalent, although we're still not there, in working in patient-specific needs for IRB considerations, working through feasibility, and also it starts with the feasibility outreach piece. And I think we are getting better at it, but again, we're still not there. It's always been difficult. But now, as we learn more about the patients that are involved in the studies, we're learning to reach out to sites with very specific questions. We're also giving more transparent feedback to the protocol design, and if it's suitable for the patient population and other considerations. So
much more collaborative, much more interactive.
Absolutely.
Considering the perspectives of diverse stakeholders. That is true. That's been a difference. And I'm wondering, Amy and team and Leanne, are you being involved with this process? Have people reached out to you to get your perspective on some trial design before it's actually implemented and we discover there's a problem with trying to do it? Are you involved with that process at all?
We are involved with that process. We think that that's, one of the reasons we exist is to have our kids work with people before they start a clinical trial in those early planning stages. Sure that the protocol is something that's going to work for the children that you're looking at. Also to maybe make the consent or assent a little more understandable at certain age levels so that they have a better idea of what's going to happen. And we think that between those two things, working on a better protocol and a better consent or assent, that you will have more kids be able to join and really understand what they're getting into. And therefore, we hope that you have kids stay in the trials longer.
Yes, I had quite an experience. My first introduction to the need to do that came a few years ago in a muscular dystrophy program. I had no idea how difficult it might be to do certain maneuvers that we took for granted in the protocol until I reached out to a family member and a patient and had a great discussion on it. And I'm thinking, the patient's perspective is probably the most important. And, we talked about that a bit yesterday. Yalinda, do you have an idea too? How do you see it as a patient? I know that you've been involved with this for some time. Do you get involved early in the process, discussing protocol design and other aspects of doing the study?
Yes, we have been participating in even coming out with research videos So we'll help them come up with videos on how they should present to kids the information with clinical trials and how they work. So it's really all about explaining it to kids in a universal way. This way they understand.
Wow, that's really interesting. You know, up until our conversation this morning, I actually had never heard of that. So you've been involved with creating videos that you would use to instruct other children about the details of a study.
Yeah, we review them.
Do you like speaking with the physicians and the other healthcare professionals when you are involved in a protocol? Has that been an interesting and useful experience for you?
Yes, it definitely has. I know most of my best experiences with trials have been speaking to them in person, especially talking to my geneticist. She really made it clear and so simple about how my mutation affects me. And it was just so amazing for her to take the time to thoroughly explain it until I was able to comprehend it.
All of that medical gobbledygook is not a disincentive. Do you enjoy listening to that?
Yes.
I can see it being quite difficult. And you know, kind of finally, I'm thinking, Anne, that the notion of having access to the therapy, even if I participate, you know, there's some possibility in certain trial designs that I won't be exposed to the new intervention. Do you think, Anne, that having or planning for access to therapy at a certain point in the program has some merit when we do the feasibility process?
I think that's always an important consideration, because we try to advise program teams to incorporate thinking about when is the right time to introduce early access in the rare disease space, especially one to consider the milestones in your development of the compound, of when you're going to have enough safety data that you could actually have additional early access patients exposed. And also, there are patients that may not fit into the clinical trial, because now, while they were a perfect study patient when they were identified, perhaps their disease has progressed at a more rapid pace, and now they no longer fit into those entry criteria. So working with patient groups and understanding how they would be able to contribute to an early access program in terms of understanding the materials, creating an expanded access protocol, an early access protocol, that's all very an important part of what we try to consider.
Yes, how exciting. You know, I spend most of my week trying to figure out how to put more patients on active and fewer on control. It's a number one issue. And, you know, the timing of it is also key, because as you've suggested, Anne, some of the neurodevelopmentally disturbed patients, if the product is indeed useful, need to be exposed earlier in the disease rather than later in the disease. So I really find it difficult to adjudicate these multiple conflicting points of view, which impact, you know, how the protocol is actually done. I think that's a major effort moving forward, as well as the topic of what I like to call external controls. Individuals not in your program who are nevertheless contributing information to the program may be one of the most exciting developments recently that we've encountered. And like many, we're trying to sort through exactly how to do that well. Now, when we think about engagement, the other thing that COVID is doing, so this is interesting. So COVID is accentuating the sentiment that we should do more things at home and not in the clinic. Comes up all the time in every indication. So I'm wondering, Lori, how do we connect patients to their healthcare professionals? It's, you know, it sounds like a really, we all can agree, for me, it's unbelievable that we don't have access to the people that are actually managing our condition. Yet that seems to be the direction that thing might be going in. So, you know, what are your thoughts on that, Laura? Any?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I think once again, it comes back to really understanding the needs of the patient in this particular disease. So, so first of all, knowing that up front, having that expertise, and if you don't have it, then you need to make sure you get it as a sponsor. You need to have those insights from patient advocacy groups such as iCAN and others. And then with that, again, it goes back to the feasibility questionnaire, making sure that what's in the protocol is then also translated to the right sites. So those sites may technically qualify. There are so many things to take into consideration. Are they able to accommodate the needs of the patient, especially in a COVID environment? Are they having any carryover effects from COVID that would limit their ability to work in the study effectively? Again, it also goes to, are they able to work with documents, et cetera, and do it in such a way that doesn't delay the study? Also, other things to take into consideration is retention. So back to your question, Dr. Murphy, how do we keep patients in a COVID environment? We can do virtual visits, and in some cases that makes sense. I know Yalinda had mentioned that she had even had some experience with that, such as telehealth. And in some cases, it works well. In other cases, such as some adolescent studies that we've done, the adolescents actually missed having that face-to-face connection. So again, it goes back to understanding the patients. And then, of course, there's home health care. And then I know, Leanne, you had mentioned that you have digital technology experience. And digital technology is one way to help patients participate who might not otherwise be able to participate in studies. However, we need to be mindful that the digital technology makes sense for the patients that we're studying.
Mm-hmm. Well, that sounds really phenomenal. Was brought to life to me, the family says, Dr. Murphy, we live 200 miles from the clinic. And on a great day, I struggled to have my son have breakfast. You want to schedule a weekly meeting at a clinic with a fasting lab and a walk test? I got to tell you, it's not going to be such good data. So this notion of trying to do things at home and at a distance is great. I was wondering, what was the experience like? Was it good for you? Was it an interesting thing to have telemedicine? Did that work as well as seeing the people in person?
Yes, thank you. I think that telemedicine is a good idea because it's really easy for transportation just staying at home. Because even on some of my bad health days, it's really a struggle to get to the hospital. Mm-hmm. But I had telehealth with my pain management clinic, and that went phenomenal. But telemedicine for physical and occupational therapy is a little bit more difficult compared to pain clinic.
Yes. What was it about the interaction with the pain management specialist that you enjoyed the most? What was it about the interaction that you think you made it work so well for you?
I think it was having the support verbally. It was just really supporting, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. Just being able to communicate with them face to face instead of hands-on, because normally it's just a verbal conversation anyway when I am in clinic. So it felt the same.
A sense of camaraderie and being integrated with a bigger group seems important. We often say that that people get involved in our studies. It seems to me more for the camaraderie and the enmeshment and the interaction with other individuals who have their condition and with healthcare professionals, as much as they do for access to innovative therapy. Leanne, you've had some experience with this as well. So how has that worked for you?
I think it's worked really well. I think being in technology, I'm a research scientist as well as the president of iCAN and technology. I think that it can make a world of difference in how we can operate. I think that medicine is moving more towards the patient and the home environment. And I think anything we can do to kind of help.
Amy, you think people, but do you think that families and patients, for example, if we did things at home and we had home, visitors, nursing service, do you think that's good? Do you think that's something that's welcomed by family members? Or
absolutely.
It's not it's not perceived as an intrusion into their personal space, no?
I don't think it is. For someone who has a condition where they need to see a doctor, maybe a person like Yalinda was expressing with the physical therapy, they don't see that as an intrusion. I think that they see that as a welcome.
A welcome addition.
Yes, definitely.
A welcome addition to things. What about the technology, everyone? That's seems to be an integrated part of what we're trying to do. We have a study now, it's a rare disease that the children are seen twice a year. Everything else is remotely done. Lots of technology. is that a incentive depending on your age or a disincentive? So how do you see that? Like wearable devices. Is that something that teenagers might enjoy doing or not? Yeah. Well, Linda, is that a thought you've had? I mean, have you had to, Linda, wear a device to track movements as an example? Has that been something you've been?
Yes, I have. I
Yeah.
have worn a 30-day heart monitor,
Wow.
and I did not enjoy it.
Did
I
not.
can be really honest about that. But I knew it was critical for my health for them to track it.
Yes.
And I just recently had a loop recorder placed. And so that's been more wearable for me rather than the cardiac device.
I see. The cardiac device you found to be inconvenient and intrusive. Did you have to wear it all day?
I did.
Oh gosh, that sounds tough, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I could see that one. Well, taking things from more at home, kind of pushing things out to the home seems to be a trend. In our experience, it seems to be accentuating. I do think it changes the qualitative interaction we have with patients. I hope that we don't miss something by doing that. It seems to me that we might. And so, Laurie, this notion of making it more personable, more accessible to a patient looms large, I know, in your feasibility assessments. And it also seems to me, everyone, there's such an individuality about it. If the more I learn, particularly about orphan diseases, well, the more I come to appreciate that every single patient, even though they might carry a similar diagnosis, has a uniquely different experience of the illness. And I often say around here, we can get book learning on the disease. I read the articles, but I don't understand the illness. And it seems to me that's where patient advocacy groups might be more than kind of contributory. So, Amy and Leanne, have you been contributing to that more? My guess is yes, right? You've been bringing in the patient perspective on program design.
Absolutely. We think that that's really important, and it's something that should just kind of be done as opposed to being an afterthought or a later thought.
Yes.
Absolutely. Getting the patient perspective. They are the expert in living with their condition. They are the expert in understanding what it's like to have their condition. And so we really put the children out there as the experts, that everybody, including the doctors, like you said, with the book learning, there's still things that they can learn.
Right. Have you been involved with participatory decisions with regulatory bodies? Now, that's been new for me, I have to say. That's been new for me, but so exciting and enriching to do that. So to go down to the agency, you have your usual discussions about this or that, but having a family perspective in the room, gosh, I just think it makes a difference to the tone and tenor of the interaction. Have you had an opportunity to do that?
We have. So through iCAN, we have worked to create relationships with FDA, CDC, and European organizations to ensure that the kids are thought of when these regulatory decisions are being made. We've had great success with it, and now one of their first steps is to come back to us and ask for a child to participate along, sometimes with a family member. There's a caregiver that's potentially working alongside the doctors to make sure that their child receives care. They want that voice too. So it does create a richer and fuller experience of knowing what those expert perspectives are when decisions are being made.
Yes, and I must say from personal experience, it also introduces a certain kind of gentleness into the meeting, a different feel and tone to the conversation. I think it's been invaluable. And I'm kind of guessing, Anne, you get involved quite a bit in this notion of when might we make a drug more accessible. I would imagine, I know for a fact over the years, you were really one of the principal people back in the HIV days.
Yeah, so we do get involved very early on and have lots of conversations with the health authorities. And going to your earlier point, I think that the COVID and the telemedicine has really had those same regulators open their opportunities in the early access space. They are very open to now direct to patient and telemedicine. So the necessity, COVID has really driven us into the health authorities in various countries asking, can we do certain things for patients with rare diseases. I have to say, in some countries, the health authorities have actually been even more responsive than they normally are, and we've had access granted rather rapidly in places like India or South American countries. But in terms of telemedicine and telehealth for some of the visits, you do run into problems outside of the U.S. and North America in some of these rural areas where those would pose particular challenges, and the patient visit at the center, even though it is a distance, is actually an alternative that the patients do look forward to. But it's a mixture of what we see. But the regulators, the health authorities, have really come to the forefront, have been flexible, have been supportive, and we've had very rapid response from them on different proposals, especially the different types of endpoints and tools that we want the patients to assess at their home instead of at clinic.
Phenomenal. Did you have an occasion, Ann, where expanded or early access interfered with the completion of a registration program? It's a bit of a concern. You've got a rare population, particularly, right? You make the drug accessible as it should be, but at the same time, you're trying to develop some evidence of safety and efficacy. Have you had an experience where that's occurred?
I think that the best relationship in planning a program, the best relationship is where there's a very good alignment of the clinical trials and the conduct, as well as the early access, so that any patients that potentially could be eligible for the clinical trials, that needs to be the priority, because the faster we get the clinical trials completed, the earlier the medicines are going to be available to the general population. So we try to ensure that there's not that tension or conflict. Rather, when patients and physicians are inquiring about compassionate use or expanded access in the early phases, we make them aware of the clinical trials that they might be suitable for. So I think that there is a really great opportunity for both to go forward in parallel without the tensions between the two.
I see. It's terrific. It also sounds as well that you're not just doing it passively, that the individuals involved in expanded access are also contributing data. I think I heard that in what you just said. How are the data used? How is it done in your experience?
So there are different approaches. So in that early stage of planning a program where you are collecting patient data, there needs to be consideration of, are you collecting standard of care data, which is a very passive approach but requires a little bit more planning, because, for example, standard of care data, you're going to have to fall into what that particular country uses as their assessment tool, or their particular lab that they're using, rather than a centralized approach. And also, so there's that advanced planning there, but there's also the global acceptance in almost all countries that data that's collected in an early access space is very meaningful. This is the real world data. This is how the patient data can be expected, and patient progression can be expected in the real world environment once the drug is out there and it has been approved. So it actually is a very welcome source of data because it will reflect what is going on. So there is some additional planning that you need to take into consideration. However, you can also collect a standardized data collection form at specific time points. So
Right.
Much like in a clinical trial.
Nice, very nice. And I'm imagining that might be useful in issues of formulary placement and reimbursement. And so I'm wondering, Amy and Leanne, are you generally encountering challenges that could not be easily surmounted in terms of what I call payer sentiments? You go to any orphan disease congress, at least a third of it is on getting products on formulary and getting them adequately reimbursed. In your experience, is that really the issue it appears to be? Seems to be a dominant theme at most meetings. I'm just wondering from your perspective, is access in a traditional commercial sense, Is that a problem for many of our children and adolescents and adults?
You know, it varies case by case. We do have some of our youth members that do struggle with obtaining the medicines that they need, and they have brought that towards us. Working with iCAN, we also have kids that are aligned with their particular rare disease organization as well.
Mm-hmm.
And we support, you know, trying to make sure that their voice is heard and that they're able to get the areas of support that they need. Wherever we can, and within that group, within the larger audience of organizations that are working with our kiddos. You know, our focus is a little different. We're working on getting the kids out to share their stories to help improve medical care. And the advocacy piece is a little bit different. We're looking at all of the kids across all spectrums of all diseases. And when it comes to those particular medicines, I think the greater support comes from their actual organizations that work with their rare disease.
I see. Are you encountering any right to try issues? Are people exploiting that, or has it been necessary or not so much? You know, right to try legislation, drugs in development, I can't get it. I need to petition the pharmaceutical company for access. Is that something that you're picking up or not?
I think there's, you know, a few cases of that. You know, it's not something, again, that, you know, we're hearing a lot of. You know, our kids are really involved in helping with the beginnings of the research itself. And so, you know, it would probably be, again, a case-by-case basis. And it's not to say that that doesn't happen, because we're very sure it does. But within the ICAM spectrum, it's probably not as prevalent as it might be with some of those very small rare disease groups where, you know, there's just a few children that are seeking care that they need and not able as much to get the medicines that they need.
Yes. And have you encountered that at all in your activity? Right to try, much of that?
So I think that we get a lot of calls around right to try, and you know, we do appreciate patients wanting to explore that, but the FDA pathway has been so incredibly effective. I can tell you, even during COVID, we had approvals within 4 days of requests. So the fact that the FDA is approving 99.6%, almost all requests that are valid, where the patient fits into criteria, it really is a testament to the fact that while you know the laws have had some right to try laws have had some momentum in 2018 when they were first passed, they actually haven't been utilized because the current pathway involving the FDA is so fast and so effective. The roadblocks are very low.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear, isn't it? Yeah, I thought it might not be as needed as it appeared to be, but you know, there are always cases, and I do appreciate that. And I can see what you're saying in the ultra rare disorders, perhaps something. And again, as I mentioned earlier, going back to this notion for certain illnesses, the need to treat early is so overwhelming. If the product is in fact useful, you don't want to move past the window of maximum benefit, so to speak. And so I could really, if I had a disorder like that or a child with such a disorder, I would appreciate that. But it seems like a lot of our discussion is balancing the interest of different stakeholders. You know, around here, I often tell the fellows we have, I said, you know, when you design a program, what you're really doing is you're adjudicating the interest of multiple stakeholders. You're trying to find a sweet spot where all of these different elements, you know, work best. And so, you know, I also know that, you know, so you're speaking yesterday, that the camps are quite useful for some of the diseases. I remember the neat story we talked about, the summer camp that, you know, we went on. And any experiences with that we could speak to? Summer camps and the camaraderie that comes from doing it? Leanne, I know you did it.
Yes, thank you. It was. I had attended MDA camp, and it was so amazing. I had the best time ever. And it was a week long, and they were so accommodating to individualized needs.
Oh.
So we each had our own caretaker assigned for the whole week, and all our needs were met completely.
Mm-hmm. What's it like to share? I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of common ground amongst the participants? Do you guys exchange like anecdotes and issues that were aggravating at home? And boy, what do you think of that? Do you go through that type of discussion when you have a meeting?
Definitely. We all vent and we talk about some of the things that are hard for other people to experience, but we go through. And so it's just amazing to have that support from kids who understand the exact situation I'm in.
Is it true? I'm wondering, Amy and team, is it true that a lot of individuals with rare diseases feel alone and isolated and not a part of a bigger group, or do you think we've kind of overcome that?
No, I think that continues to be, a concern of ours, and that's why we have iCAN. Each year we pull together a summit where we invite kids from all around the world to participate, and many have rare, complicated conditions, and that ability to talk to one another, and even if they're not living with the same rare disease, it still allows them that camaraderie and that togetherness of knowing that there are other kids going through the same things that they're going through. And that mental health well-being, I think, is just as necessary as it is to have the medicines and treatment for care. So we certainly, want to do our best to support that. As Yalinda's experience with camp also shares, that togetherness spirit really does help.
Yes, it helps those of us on the design side as well, because for some of the rare diseases, we really don't know the condition, we don't know the experience. And by having the opportunity to sit with families and patients that have these disorders, at least for me, it brings it home. It brings it home in a tangible way that I had not appreciated until that was done. So very encouraged to hear that kind of development. Lori, what about globally? I mean, you do so much work globally. Do you have certain sentiments about regions of the world and where the opportunities might lie or maybe not? Did you have a feeling for it in rare and orphan indications?
Well, I think it comes down to, again, the theme is knowing your patients, but then knowing your patients also requires knowing their cultural sensitivities, their needs. Just because it's done typically one way, one place, we have to remember that every rare disease is different and every rare disease patient is different in numerous ways. First thing I would ask, and somebody I know that I respect had said, feasibility happens, at the front door. Basically, you have to first make sure that you're selecting sites and globally countries that, just as Anne was even saying, that are amenable to what you're studying and can support the objectives that you want. And the other piece is, how far does somebody have to travel? And if it's getting drug direct to patient, for example, how direct is that? And what are some of the global regulatory issues that are involved with that? Is it easy? Is it complex? And then when the patient gets to the site for the study, are all of the study procedures in the right order? Do we need all of the study procedures? So really just making sure that we also look at some of the cultural differences as we're executing and implementing the protocol procedures, so that the patient feels engaged, they feel respected, and they feel like they belong. This is something they want to do, just as Yalinda has described with some of her experiences today.
Well, we have some great questions coming in on those topics, team. So I'll throw a few at you and see what you think. So here's a really neat one. It's from Pam, and it's about supportive elements for caregivers. Have we, as anyone, purposely designed that into a program, consciously organizing a support approach for the caregivers of patients with rare and orphan diseases? Has that been something that you've encountered? I would say, Laurie, on our side, we have support. It's more on the pragmatics, on the moving of the patient about, but not so much on family. What do you think?
I've seen where, we've actually done studies that involve adolescents and the family, and we have in fact included more, I want to say, emotional support, ancillary to the other objectives within the protocol. So the short answer is yes, we've done that. And it was successful. In fact, I think that helped with retention quite a bit, given the indication. And the adolescent patients felt that they liked having that, that emotional bond with that person, and also same with the rest of the family. So yes, I think it can be used in certain situations quite well, and especially efficiently for retention.
Mm-hmm. And Amy and Leanne, are you encountering that in your programs where a sponsor is creating, I call it a module, an approach to the caregivers that is systematically applied and across the study rather than ad hoc? Are you seeing more of that recently?
We work directly with quite a few of key players of different groups that support us, and the kids are developing that relationship and knowing that they have other trusted adults that are supportive of their care and helping them to feel better. You know, especially participating with some of our one-on-one events, you know, bringing kids together virtually in sessions like today with the UnConference. Yalinda has now made several new friends that, you know, are cheering her on and supporting her as she goes out to do all the wonderful things that she'll be doing in the future. And it's things like that, you know, they're subtle, but they make a huge difference in the life of a young person.
Yes, we have a good trialist listening in today who said, you know, in essence, what you're doing is giving medication adjunctive to social support. It's an adjunctive type of therapy, which is actually certainly true, isn't it? Yeah. Another angle on this that someone just raised up about social networks. There's a hot topic. Is that something that's useful? I've actually heard different opinions on this one, but you tell me. You know, I'm just wondering whether it's a useful thing to proactively develop a social network in trial conduct. Yalinda, do you enjoy getting online? I'm going to say probably yes. But what do you think of that? Is that a useful thing to have a network, a dedicated place for you to share your opinions and comments with some of the other patients? Is that something?
Definitely. I think that's a useful tool. I mean, everybody is pretty much online these days. So it's amazing to have multiple platforms on any social media. I keep up with certain groups on Facebook even related to my condition, just to stay connected to adults and children. And I find it so helpful, and it just helps me feel more connected, even if we're all not located in the same place.
Mm-hmm. Has anyone had an experience with using social network that hasn't been as positive? I actually hear that occasionally, particularly during the conduct of a study. It might be possible that people have adverse or beneficial experiences. Either way, would tend to bias the study. Anne, is that something you've encountered? I know you've done this a long time.
Well, it is actually, when you think about trying to unbias a study and really try to have, you really are trying to have patients and other patients not influencing each other, because one may be on therapy, the other may not be on an active, or they might be in a different phase in their disease and their disorder. So they may be experiencing different things. And also, of course, in our clinical trials, we have different doses that patients are on in a clinical trial. So the experiences may or may not be helpful and may actually be hurtful. So I have actually had an experience where patients in a network were actually trying to unblind each other, and so that's something that is a risk, and it has to be taken into consideration as a downside to clinical trial patients participating in a network and having that social interaction, but yet not trying to, what I think everyone's common goal is to try to ensure that the trial that you're in has the greatest opportunity of success for really trying to define what the scientific questions are, and anything that could put that at risk have to be explained before individuals engage in that social network interaction.
Well, team, I'm aware that our time is coming to a close, and I thought maybe we might just do a quick round robin and ask each of us, is there any topic, theme, or notion that we would like to present today for consideration? And Yalinda, I think we'll start with you because you have the most directly relevant experience. If you have to kind of sum up where you are today in terms of your illness and how you navigate through the research space, how would you see it? Where are we headed, in your opinion?
I think that clinical trials are headed in the right direction. My current state is I'm experiencing the cardiac side of my condition, which I haven't had before, and that just recently started in December. So right now with the loop recorder placed, it is kind of a varying decision because I was presented 5 factors of needing a cardiac device, one that interferes with certain complications. And so when those factors were presented, it really showed me how individualized that treatment is based.
Yes.
Because I only had one of those 5 factors, while others mostly have all of them.
Yes, indeed. Everyone has such a unique illness, and in some case, a unique disease. The illness is what you're experiencing, but the disease is the pathophysiology. And I think that's been a real epiphany in the last 10 to 15 years. And so Amy, how do you see it? So where are we headed in terms of doing research in rare diseases?
Well, speaking from the International Children's Advisory Network, what we have been working so hard to do over the last 5 years is to make sure that it's known that it's okay to talk to kids. It's okay to ask for their thoughts and feedback on what your study is, even before, if you even have an idea and you're thinking, is this even something that would be feasible? And it's so early on, there's not even a protocol assigned yet. Have our kids, talk to them, not to be afraid of what they might say. They are little budding scientists. Every one of these kids that are coming through are the future, and they will be your colleagues one day. So our goal is to get them involved, to get them out there, to utilize their expertise, and to know that, they have the best thoughts in mind of what could be possible in the future.
And Leanne, I'm kind of wondering, strategic relationships. You're president of the organization. I'm thinking more of a strategic relationship with pharma and other research entities might be in the offing for some of these conditions. How do you see it?
We, as an organization, iCAN has sponsoring partners, and a lot of those are in pharma. And we also have community partners. And so it's really important to us to build relationships with other groups that have similar goals to ours. I do want to add one thing about kids participating in clinical trials. Kids are a little more altruistic than adults, I think, when it comes to participating in clinical trials. They really want to help the next kid who comes along if it can't help them. But a lot of times, obviously, they would do it if it would help them too.
Yes.
But they think it's really empowering, and I think it's a really great thing to include them. And I think the more that they see how our organization works across with other organizations, they understand that importance of bringing the whole community together to look at issues and really.
Phenomenal sentiment. Isn't that exciting? And now we have the technology to actually do some interesting things. And of course, and then Anne, you've done this for a long time. You had some great experiences that you've shared with me previously. And so where do you think we're headed here in terms of orphan disease research?
Yeah, I think where we're heading is that teams, more and more pharma, small, mid, large, have incorporated patient voice, patient groups, caregivers into their pre-planned early access programs that run alongside their clinical trials that are so required, and that both of them bring important, valuable pieces of information to the overall treatment of the patient, and the understanding of how that medicine is going to help potentially a patient group or a stage of the disease. So I think that the sky's the limit, and we're heading in the right direction.
Lori, what about you? Because you're the make it happen person, I call it. You got to make these things happen. So how do you see it moving forward? Are you going to change strategy, programs? What do you have in mind? No?
I'd like to see a sense of urgency carried through. We've seen it with COVID. We know we can speed things up. Well, let's do it. And I think that we can do it, especially with Yalinda's generation and even us. Let's leverage digital networks, digital technology, and not to depersonalize it, but it's really to connect the information, connect people faster, and it's supplemental to the other pieces such as the emotional support that can be provided during clinical studies. But I think we have opportunity here to speed the research along, because in some of these rare diseases, such as, just quite a few out there, we don't have time to waste. We need to move this forward very quickly.
Well, I'll close by saying what an exciting time it is to be in research. Never has the technology been more sophisticated, the disease states more nuanced, the need for collaborative research efforts more pronounced. Speaking as a physician, I really think we're at the threshold of some really terrific discoveries, and the collaborative effort demonstrated today really is emblematic of where I think research in general is headed. It has a very strong sentiment of, as we say, each of us alone is not as good as all of us together. So on behalf of everyone at Worldwide, may I take the occasion to thank the participants for the terrific contributions. Thank the folks online for the questions. There were quite a few of them, by the way. And we look forward to maybe doing this again with a different topic and a different focus. So Dana, thank you very much for organizing it today. We thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye now. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you'd like to learn more about how Worldwide Clinical Trials can support your rare disease trial, please contact us at worldwide.com.